Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Sterling. I'm 32 years old, and I was thrown out of my family home with nothing but the clothes on my back, only to return years later and own the very building my family lived in. It all started on a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the air in the city feels electric. I stepped out of the private elevator, the doors opening with a soft chime that echoed in the cavernous, marble-floored lobby of the penthouse suite. My penthouse suite, but they didn't know that yet. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses hit me first. The party was in full swing, and right in the middle of it all was my cousin, Leo Vance. He was holding a champagne flute, regaling a circle of friends with some story, his voice booming with the unearned confidence of someone who's never had to work for anything a day in his life. His eyes found mine across the room. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by a sneer that I knew all too well. It was the same sneer he'd given me the day my uncle, his father, had shown me the door. He raised his voice, making sure everyone could hear. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. Who let him in?" He laughed, a short barking sound. "He's like a bad smell. Keeps lingering no matter how many times you try to air the place out." His friends snickered. A few years ago, those words would have felt like a physical blow. They would have sent me shrinking back into the shadows, my face burning with shame. But not tonight. Tonight was different. I said nothing. I just held his gaze, my expression calm, unreadable. I let the silence hang in the air, thick and uncomfortable. I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He expected me to lash out, to defend myself, to show that he'd gotten under my skin. I gave him nothing. Instead, I turned my attention to the two uniformed security guards standing discreetly by the entrance. I gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. That was the signal. They immediately straightened up, their faces grim and professional, and started walking purposefully across the lobby. Leo's smirk widened. He thought they were coming for me. He gestured towards me with his champagne flute. "About time. Get him out of here." But they didn't stop at me. They walked right past me, their polished shoes clicking on the marble, and stopped directly in front of Leo and his bewildered friends. "Sir," the taller guard said, his voice firm but respectful, "you and your guests will have to leave." Immediately, the confusion on Leo's face was a sight to behold. It was a slow-motion cascade of emotions, arrogance turning to disbelief, then to sputtering indignation. "What are you talking about? Do you know who I am?" "My father owns this place." The guard didn't flinch. "No, sir, your father used to own this place. We're under new management, and our orders are to escort all unauthorized personnel from the premises." Leo was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He finally turned to me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "You? What did you do?" I finally allowed myself a small, cold smile. I walked calmly towards him, stopping just a few feet away. I looked around the opulent lobby at the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering city skyline. "It's a nice place, isn't it?" I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the sudden silence. "That's why I bought it." I met his gaze again. "I don't just own the penthouse, Leo. I own the building." The color drained from his face, and as the guards began to firmly guide him and his stunned friends towards the elevator, I didn't feel the rush of vengeful pleasure I once thought I would. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of finality. This chapter was over. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back. Back to the day it all fell apart, 2 years earlier. That's where the real story begins. It wasn't in a penthouse lobby, but in a stuffy, wood-paneled office that smelled of old leather and disappointment. My Uncle Arthur's office. He sat behind a desk large enough to land a helicopter on, his face set in a mask of stern disapproval. My Aunt Eleanor, his wife, stood beside him, a portrait of quiet, passive agreement. And Leo, of course, was lounging in a leather armchair in the corner, looking bored. It had been 6 months since my parents' funeral. The grief was still a raw, open wound. They were gone, taken in a sudden, brutal car accident, and in the chaotic aftermath, my uncle had been named the executor of their estate. My estate, really. I was 29, but according to him, I was still a child who couldn't be trusted. "Justin," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We need to talk about your future, or rather your lack of one." I had come to him that day with a business plan. It was a tech startup idea, something I'd been working on with my dad before he passed. It was my passion, my one hope for a future that felt like my own. I needed a small loan from the inheritance my parents had left me to get it off the ground. He pushed the proposal across the desk with the back of his hand as if it were contaminated. "This is a joke, a fantasy. You have a responsibility to your family name, and this is a disgrace. It's a solid plan, Uncle Arthur," I said, my voice tight. "Dad believed in it. Your father was a dreamer," he snapped, "and look where it got him. This family built its fortune on real estate, on tangible assets, not on clicks and clouds." Aunt Eleanor placed a delicate hand on his shoulder. "What your uncle means, dear," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "is that we're worried about you. We think it's time you took a more traditional path. Arthur has offered you an entry-level position at Vance Holdings. A proper job, a steady salary, an entry-level position. I had a degree in computer science and had helped my dad manage his own small firm for 5 years. It was an insult and we all knew it. It was a way to control me, to keep me under his thumb. I don't want a job at your company, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I want to build my own. All I'm asking for is access to my own money. The money Mom and Dad set aside in my college fund, the inheritance they left for me. Arthur leaned forward, his eyes like chips of ice. That money, he said slowly, is being managed, placed in a trust for your own good. We can't have you squandering your inheritance on some childish whim. A lawyer has arranged everything. A lawyer, his lawyer. I felt the trap closing around me. So you're just going to take it? I asked, disbelief warring with anger. We are protecting it, he corrected me, and protecting our family from the embarrassment of your inevitable failure. He stood up, the movement a clear dismissal. The decision is final. You can either accept the job offer or you can find your own way. But as long as you pursue this foolishness, you are no longer welcome in this house. I looked at him, then at my aunt, whose face was a blank canvas of feigned sympathy. I looked at Leo, who was now smirking openly, enjoying the show. In that moment, I saw them for what they were. They weren't family, they were vultures. The silence stretched. I felt something inside me break, but then something else hardened in its place. A cold, quiet resolve. Fine, I said. The word was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the silent room. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I didn't look at them again. I walked out of the office, down the grand staircase, past the portraits of ancestors I no longer felt connected to. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing off my past. I was alone, with nothing but a few $100s in my bank account and a burning sense of injustice that would become the fuel for everything that came next. Family, I realized, isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes, it's a word for the people who hurt you the most, and I would never forget it. The city that had once felt like home suddenly became a hostile, unforgiving landscape. The first few weeks were a blur of cheap motels and dwindling funds. My fancy degree meant nothing without connections, and my uncle had made sure to sever every last one I had. The world I knew had vanished overnight. Reality hit hard. I ended up in a tiny, rundown apartment on the industrial side of town, the kind of place where the pipes groan all night and you can hear your neighbors arguing through the paper-thin walls. To pay the rent, I took the only job I could find, a night shift at a massive refrigerated warehouse. Every night from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I was a ghost in a frozen world. I'd put on a heavy thermal suit and spend 8 hours driving a forklift through icy corridors, stacking pallets of frozen vegetables and processed foods. The cold was relentless. It seeped into my bones, a constant, physical reminder of the coldness I'd been shown by my own family. My hands were always raw, my face numb. During my 30-minute break, I'd sit in a sterile break room under flickering fluorescent lights, drinking burnt coffee from a vending machine and sketching out algorithms and business models on greasy napkins. My dream wasn't dead, it was just hibernating. In those dark, lonely months, I clung to the few connections I had left. One of them was Chloe, a friend from college. We'd been part of the same coding club and I thought we shared a bond. I was naive. I confided in her, telling her about my situation, even showing her the refined business plan for my startup. I needed someone to believe in me. One day I called her, excited about a breakthrough I'd had. Chloe, you won't believe this. I figured out the core problem with the user interface. She cut me off. Her voice was strange, distant. Justin, I can't talk right now. Is everything okay? I asked. Yeah, fine. I'm just at a lunch meeting. I could hear music and laughter in the background. It sounded expensive. Then I heard a familiar voice, loud and obnoxious. It was Leo. My blood ran cold, colder than the warehouse. You're with my cousin? There was a long pause. It's not what you think, she said, but her voice was laced with guilt. He made me an offer. An offer, I repeated, my throat suddenly tight. He liked that idea you had, she confessed, her words tumbling out in a rush. The one about the integrated platform. He bought the preliminary code from me, paid me $5,000. $5,000. She had sold my dream, my one lifeline, for the price of a used car. She had sold me out to the very people who had cast me aside. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it left me breathless. It wasn't just about the code. It was about the trust. She was the last person I thought I could count on. I'm sorry, Justin, she whispered. I needed the money. I didn't say anything. I just hung up the phone. I stood there in my tiny apartment, the silence pressing in on me. That was the day I learned the second hard lesson. Desperation makes people do ugly things, and the day I truly understood that I was on my own. If I was going to climb out of this hole, I would have to do it by myself, one frozen pallet at a time. The anger and the hurt solidified into something else that night. It wasn't a desire for revenge. It was a need for survival. I wasn't going to let them win. Couldn't. For another 6 months, my life was a monotonous cycle of work and exhaustion. I saved every penny. I ate instant noodles and slept on a mattress on the floor. But during every waking moment, I wasn't at the warehouse. I was at the public library, using their free computers to rebuild my project from scratch. I rewrote every line of code, making it better, stronger, and more secure. The betrayal had forced me to innovate. I knew I couldn't do it all alone forever. I needed a partner, someone with a different skill set, someone who understood the world of finance and business, a world that was still foreign to me. I started attending small, local tech meetups, the kind held in the back of coffee shops, not in fancy conference rooms. That's where I met Amelia Hayes. She wasn't what I expected. She was sharp, impeccably dressed, even in this casual setting, and had an intensity in her eyes that was both intimidating and magnetic. She was a junior financial analyst at some mid-tier firm, and she was bored out of her mind. She was looking for something real to sink her teeth into. I gave my 2-minute pitch to the small crowd. I was nervous, my hands were sweating, and my voice probably cracked. Most people nodded politely and went back to their coffee, but Amelia stayed. She walked up to me afterward, a skeptical look on her face. "Your presentation was a mess," she said, her tone blunt, but the idea has potential. We talked for 2 hours that night. I laid out everything, the code, the market analysis I'd cobbled together, my vision for the future. I even told her about my family, about Leo and Chloe. I didn't want any more secrets. She listened patiently, her sharp eyes never leaving my face. When I was done, she was quiet for a long time. I thought she was going to walk away just like everyone else. Instead, she looked at me and said, "You need help. You're a brilliant coder, Justin, but you're a terrible businessman." I bristled. "Thanks. It's not an insult. It's an observation," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "You need a partner, someone to handle the strategy, the funding pitches, the stuff you hate. You need me." I laughed, a bitter sound. "I can't even afford to pay myself. My company headquarters is a public library computer. What could I possibly offer you?" She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Equity, partnership, a chance to build something from the ground up." She paused, then took a deep breath. "Look, I have some money saved up. It's not much, just over $20,000. It was supposed to be a down payment on a condo." I stared at her, stunned. "You're not serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," she said. "I've been analyzing companies for 3 years, and I've seen a dozen startups with 100 times your funding and 1/10 of your potential fail. I know a winner when I see one. The question is, are you willing to trust someone again?" That was the real question, trust. It was a commodity I had run out of. But looking at Amelia, at the fierce intelligence and unmistakable sincerity in her eyes, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. "Okay," I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "Okay, let's do it." That was the beginning of Sterling Corporation. We incorporated the next week. Our first office was a tiny windowless room we rented by the month. She became my first employee, my partner, and my most trusted ally. Turns out that $20,000 wasn't just a down payment on a condo. It was a down payment on our future. It was the first real investment anyone had ever made in me, and I was determined to make it the best investment she had ever made in her life. The next year was a whirlwind. We worked 18-hour days, fueled by cheap pizza and an unshakable belief in what we were building. Amelia was a force of nature. She refined my business plan, created financial models that were works of art, and had a knack for getting into rooms with people who were way out of our league. I focused on the tech, perfecting our platform until it was faster, more intuitive, and more secure than anything else on the market. We landed our first small contract, then a bigger one. Word started to spread. Sterling Corp was no longer just an idea sketched on a napkin. It was a real growing business with a reputation for excellence. We moved out of the tiny office and into a respectable space downtown. I could finally afford to pay myself a decent salary, and I made sure Amelia's was even better. I tried not to think about my family. I funneled all my energy, all my anger, into my work success. I remembered my mother telling me once, "Is the best revenge. It's the kind they can't undo." Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. It was from an encrypted, anonymous address. The subject line was just a single word: vindication. My heart started pounding. I opened it. There was no text, just a single password-protected attachment. Below it was a clue, a reference to a childhood memory only a few people would know. A family secret. I typed in the password, a folder opened, filled with scanned documents, internal memos, and spreadsheets. It was the complete financial record of Vance Holdings for the past 3 years, and it was a disaster. I called Amelia into my office immediately. "Lock the door," I said, my voice low. We spent the next 6 hours poring over the documents. It was worse than I could have imagined. Under my uncle's aging leadership and Leo's reckless management, the company was drowning. They had made a series of terrible real estate investments, leveraged the company to the hilt, and were bleeding money. Leo had apparently received a huge promotion he didn't deserve, and his first major project had been a catastrophic failure, which they had tried to bury in the books. They were months away from defaulting on their loans from total collapse. "Who sent this?" Amelia asked, her eyes wide as she scanned a profit and loss statement that was drenched in red ink. "I don't know for sure," I said, thinking about the password clue. "But I have a pretty good idea. It has to be Sarah. Sarah was my younger cousin, Leo's sister. She was always the quiet one, the overlooked one. She had always been kind to me, and I knew she hated the way her parents and brother treated, well, everyone. She was working in the accounting department at Vance Holdings, a position her father considered beneath her, but it meant she had access to everything. She had seen the rot from the inside and decided to do something about it." Amelia looked up from her screen, her analyst brain already working at 100 miles an hour. "Justin, this is more than just information. This is a roadmap." "A roadmap to what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "To a hostile takeover," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Their biggest creditors are a handful of investment banks. Their debt is trading for pennies on the dollar. If we move quickly and quietly, we could buy up a controlling interest in their debt before they even know what's happening." The idea was audacious. It was terrifying. Sterling Corp was successful, but we weren't a corporate rating firm. It would take every bit of capital we had, and we'd have to take out a significant loan ourselves. We'd be betting the entire company. "It's risky," I said, thinking out loud. "It's the riskiest thing we've ever done." She agreed. "But look at this." She pointed to a line item. Montgomery Estates. It was a subsidiary of Vance Holdings, a luxury property management firm. It was the one part of the company that was actually profitable, but it was being used as a cash cow to prop up all their failing ventures, and it managed a portfolio of high-end buildings, including one very specific penthouse, the one my aunt and uncle lived in, the one Leo was using as his personal party palace. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. This was about justice. This was about business. They had built their empire on a foundation of arrogance and cruelty. Now that foundation was crumbling, and I had a chance to buy the land it was sitting on. "We'll need to talk to a lawyer," I said, my voice steady. "The best corporate lawyer in the city. Find out just how possible this is." Amelia grinned, a fierce predatory light in her eyes. "I've already got a list." The game had changed. For 2 years I had been on the defensive, just trying to survive. Now for the first time, I was on the attack, and they would never see me coming. The next 2 months were a blur of clandestine meetings, encrypted phone calls, and high-stakes negotiations. We were playing in a league we had no business being in, but Amelia was a genius, and our lawyer, a shrewd man named Marcus Thorne, was a shark. We set up a shell corporation to act as a blind, buying up Vance Holdings' debt from creditors who were more than happy to unload the toxic assets. It was a surgical operation executed in the shadows. All of my savings, all of the company's profits, everything was on the line. The final piece fell into place on a Thursday, Marcus called. "It's done," he said, his voice calm. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, your corporation is the primary lien holder for Vance Holdings. You effectively own them, Justin. Congratulations." I hung up the phone, a strange feeling washing over me. It wasn't triumph, not yet. It was the quiet, heavy feeling of holding someone else's entire world in your hands. The official notification letters went out that afternoon. I knew it wouldn't take long. My phone rang at 4:32 p.m. The caller ID simply said Leo. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I leaned back in my chair, looked out my office window at the city skyline, and said calmly, "You." The voice on the other end was a strangled shriek of rage. "What the hell did you do?" "We just got a letter from some holding company. Says they've acquired our debt. Says they're restructuring. This has your name written all over it." "Hello, Leo," I said, my voice cool as ice. "It's been a while. How are you?" "Don't you play games with me?" he sputtered. "My father is going to sue you into oblivion. We'll have every lawyer in the city on this. You can't just steal a company." "I didn't steal anything, Leo," I replied, my tone even. "I bought it. All perfectly legal. Your creditors were desperate to sell, and I was happy to buy. It's called capitalism. You should read about it sometime. It's the system that's allowed you to fail upwards your entire life." There was a choked sound on the other end. I could practically hear the gears in his brain grinding, trying to process a reality he couldn't comprehend. The powerless, pathetic cousin he'd kicked to the curb was now his boss, his landlord, his banker. He couldn't make it make sense. "You're bluffing," he finally managed to say, but there was no conviction in his voice. "This is just some sick joke." "Is it?" I asked. "Let me be very specific so there's no confusion. The shell corporation that holds your debt is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sterling Corporation, which means As of this morning, I own the company that holds the lease on your office. I own the company that signs your paycheck. And yes, Leo, I own the company that holds the deed to that lovely penthouse you've been living in, so I'd think very carefully about your next words. Silence. A long, heavy, beautiful silence. I could hear his ragged breathing. The bully had lost his power, and he didn't know what to do. Why? He finally whispered, the anger gone, replaced by a raw, pathetic confusion. Why would you do this? I thought about his sneer in my uncle's office. I thought about the cold of the warehouse. I thought about Chloe's betrayal, which he had orchestrated. I thought about all of it. Because you taught me a very valuable lesson, Leo, I said, my voice hardening. You and your father. You taught me that in this world, you either build your own house or someone else will tear yours down, so I decided to build. And as it turns out, my foundation was a little more solid than yours. I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call. A few minutes later, an email popped up on my screen. It was an invitation to the annual Montgomery Estates Charity Gala. It's one of the city's premier social events, an event my family attended every year, an event I had been excluded from. This year, however, the invitation was addressed directly to me, Mr. Justin Sterling, as a distinguished guest. Amelia walked in, holding an identical invitation. You got one too? I nodded, a slow smile spreading across my face. It seems we're on the guest list this year. She smiled back, understanding immediately. So, I guess we're going to a party. Oh yeah, I said, looking at the invitation. It's time to formally introduce the new management. The week leading up to the gala was the calm before the inevitable storm. The city's financial news outlets were buzzing with rumors about the sudden and mysterious acquisition of Vance Holdings. The stories were all the same. An unknown entity had swooped in and saved the legacy firm from certain bankruptcy. No one knew it was me. Not yet. For my part, I tried to focus on work. But the gala loomed large in my mind. It felt like the final act of a play that had been 2 years in the making. This wasn't just a party. It was a reckoning. The night of the event, I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment, a place infinitely larger and more comfortable than the hovel I started in, but not yet the penthouse. Amelia had insisted I get a custom-tailored suit. You're not the kid in the warehouse anymore, Justin, she'd said. You're the CEO of Sterling Corporation. You need to look the part. She was right. The man looking back at me in the mirror was someone I barely recognized. The suit was sharp, a deep charcoal gray that fit perfectly. The haunted, tired look in my eyes had been replaced by a quiet confidence. The scars were still there, of course, but they were no longer open wounds. They were just a part of who I was. Amelia arrived to pick me up, looking stunning in a dark emerald gown. She gave me a once-over and whistled softly. Well, you clean up nicely. You're not so bad yourself, I said with a genuine smile. Ready for this? I was born ready, she said, though I could see a hint of nervousness in her eyes too. Just remember the plan. We let them make the first move. We stay calm. We stay professional. Tonight is not about gloating. It's about solidifying your position, right? No gloating, I repeated, though a small part of me desperately wanted to. On the car ride over, my mind drifted back to something my mother used to tell me. We were not a wealthy family when I was growing up, but we were proud. She'd always say, Justin, there will be people in this life who will try to make you feel small. They'll use their money or their status to look down on you. Don't ever let them. Don't ever sink to their level. Don't chase revenge, son. Just rise so high they can't reach you anymore. Tonight, I felt like I was finally reaching that altitude, but I knew they would still try to pull me down. The ballroom was even more opulent than I had imagined. Chandeliers dripped crystals from the ceiling. Champagne flowed freely, and the city's elite were all there, dressed in their finest, a sea of tuxedos and gowns. As Amelia and I entered, a ripple of whispers went through the room. People recognized me from the few business articles that had been written about Sterling Corporation. They knew I was a rising star in the tech world, but they couldn't understand what I was doing here at an old money real estate gala. I was an outsider, an anomaly. We hadn't been there for more than 5 minutes when I saw them. My family, Uncle Arthur, Aunt Eleanor, and Leo, they were standing in a tight, defensive circle, their faces strained. They looked like they had aged a decade in the past week. Then they saw me. For a moment, all 3 of them froze. It was as if they had seen a ghost from their past they thought they had successfully exorcised. Aunt Eleanor recovered first. She pasted on a brittle plastic smile and began gliding towards us, her husband and son trailing reluctantly in her wake. The storm had arrived. Justin, darling, she cooed, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. What a surprise to see you here. We were so worried when we heard you were invited. The last word was layered with insinuation, as if my very presence was a clerical error. Aunt Eleanor, I said, my voice neutral. Uncle Arthur, Leo. I nodded to each of them in turn. Leo sneered, having regained a sliver of his usual arrogance. Enjoying your one night out with the grown-ups? Cousin, I'm surprised you could afford the ticket. Or did you have to sell that little computer company of yours? This was it, the opening salvo. Just as Amelia had predicted. I held his gaze. Sterling Corp is doing just fine, thank you. Oh, I'm sure it is, he said with a dismissive wave. Well, try not to embarrass yourself. The adults have business to discuss. He turned to a group of investors standing nearby, men he and his father had been trying to court for months. Gentlemen, Leo said loudly, don't mind my cousin. He's just a bit out of his depth here. I stood my ground, my hands relaxed at my sides. I remembered my mother's words, rise so high they can't reach you. I was about to find out if I had risen high enough. The host of the evening, the CEO of Montgomery Estates himself, was walking towards the stage, a microphone in his hand. The show was about to begin. The low hum of conversation in the ballroom began to fade as Mr. Thompson, the distinguished silver-haired CEO of Montgomery Estates, tapped the microphone. He was an old guard figure in the city, a man whose reputation for integrity was unshakable. Everyone respected him. Good evening, everyone, he began, his warm voice filling the room. Thank you all for coming and for your generous support of this wonderful cause. He spoke for a few minutes about the charity, but I wasn't really listening. I was watching my family. They had positioned themselves near the front, trying to project an image of stability and importance, despite the nervous energy radiating from them. Leo was still shooting smug, condescending glances in my direction, whispering to his friends and pointing subtly at me. He was painting me as a court jester who had somehow wandered into the king's throne room. My uncle Arthur looked more grim. He understood the gravity of their financial situation. He was trying to catch the eye of important bankers in the room, offering tight, forced smiles. He was a man on a sinking ship, desperately trying to convince everyone that the band was just playing a new tune. Aunt Eleanor, however, was the most dangerous. She was working the crowd with practiced ease, her voice a gentle murmur of poison. I could see her leaning in to talk to the wife of a major city developer, her expression one of deep, feigned concern. I didn't need to hear the words to know what she was saying. Oh, that's my poor nephew, Justin. He's had such a difficult time since his parents passed. A bit unstable, you know. We try to help, but he's so ambitious in a desperate sort of way. She was trying to discredit me before I even had a chance to speak, to frame me as a pathetic, grasping upstart. It was a classic Eleanor move, character assassination with a smile. After the pleasantries, Mr. Thompson's tone grew more serious. Now, as some of you may have read in the financial pages, the parent company of Montgomery Estates, Vance Holdings, has recently undergone a significant transition. A nervous cough rippled through the audience. This was the gossip everyone had been waiting for. Arthur Vance's back went rigid. Leo's smirk finally faltered. For a time, Mr. Thompson continued, the future of this great company was in jeopardy. Poor management and a series of ill-advised ventures had brought it to the brink of collapse. Every eye in the room darted towards my uncle and cousin. The public humiliation was palpable. I could feel their shame burning like a physical heat across the ballroom. Leo, unable to stand the scrutiny, decided to deflect. He took a step towards me. His voice was a loud theatrical whisper that was designed to be overheard. See? He hissed. This is what happens when outsiders try to meddle in things they don't understand. My father has been working day and night to fix this mess. Aunt Eleanor joined in, placing a hand on Leo's arm. Hush, dear. Let's not air our family troubles in public. Then she looked directly at me, her eyes filled with cold fury. Some people have no sense of loyalty, no gratitude for the family that raised them. The implication was clear. They were trying to frame me as the outsider who had somehow caused this, the ungrateful orphan who had betrayed them. They were using my history, my grief as a weapon against me. For a split second, the old anger, the raw hurt from 2 years ago flared up inside me. I wanted to scream at them, to list every single one of their sins, from the theft of my inheritance to the cold dismissal from my home. But then I met Amelia's eyes across the small space that separated us. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Not yet, her look said. Wait for it. I took a deep breath. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I held their furious gazes with an unnerving calm. The stage was set. They had played their hand. Now it was Mr. Thompson's turn, and I knew exactly what he was going to say next. Mr. Thompson let the tension in the room build for a moment longer before he continued, his voice ringing with authority. But that is the past. Tonight, we are here to celebrate a new chapter. Vance Holdings and all its subsidiaries, including Montgomery Estates, were saved from bankruptcy by a single visionary investor, a man who saw the underlying value and potential that others had overlooked. The room was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Arthur looked like he was about to be sick. Leo was pale, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. They were waiting for the name of a rival developer, a Wall Street firm, anyone but me. This gentleman did not simply acquire the company's debt, Mr. Thompson declared, his eyes scanning the crowd. He has personally invested his own capital and his own considerable expertise to ensure its future. He has laid out a bold new vision, one that will not only restore Vance Holdings to its former glory, but propel it into the future. He paused, building the suspense to a fever pitch. It is my distinct honor and profound pleasure to introduce you to the man who made this all possible, the new owner and the new chairman of the board of Vance Holdings, Mr. Justin Sterling. The name hit the room like a thunderclap. For a full 3 seconds, there was nothing but stunned, absolute silence. Then, a spotlight operator found me in the crowd, and a wave of gasps and murmurs erupted. Heads whipped around, staring first at me, then at the Vances, then back at me. The pieces were clicking into place in everyone's mind, and the picture they formed was staggering. The looks on my family's faces will be etched in my memory forever. Aunt Eleanor's painted-on smile cracked and fell away, revealing a mask of pure, ugly disbelief. Uncle Arthur staggered back a step, his face ashen, looking as if he'd been physically struck. And Leo? Leo just stared, his mouth hanging open, his eyes wide with the dawning, catastrophic horror of it all. The world as he knew it had just been obliterated. Mr. Thompson gestured for me to join him on stage. As I walked forward, the crowd parted for me as if I were royalty. The whispers followed me. Sterling? That's Justin Sterling, Arthur Vance's nephew? I thought he was a failure. I reached the stage and shook Mr. Thompson's hand. He gave me a supportive squeeze. I turned to face the audience, my audience now, and stood at the podium. I looked out at the sea of shocked faces, my gaze finally resting on my family. They looked small, powerless. For the first time in my life, they were the ones looking up at me. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. "Some of you may know me. For those who don't, my name is Justin Sterling. And yes, Arthur and Eleanor Vance are my aunt and uncle." I let that sink in. "A few years ago," I continued, my voice even, "I was told by my family that I lacked vision, that my ideas were foolish, that I would amount to nothing. They shut a door in my face, believing it was the last I would ever see of them." I paused, looking directly at my uncle. "But this city taught me a valuable lesson. It taught me that sometimes the people who shut doors on you are just making space for you to build your own. And when you do, you don't have to waste your time knocking on their door ever again." I looked out at the crowd, my voice rising with conviction. "You can just buy the whole building." A wave of applause started, tentative at first, then growing into a roar. It was a recognition of the sheer audacious poetry of the moment. I had not only beaten them, I had done it on my own terms, in the most public way imaginable. I hadn't just risen so high they couldn't reach me. I had reached down and taken the very ground from under their feet. The rest of the gala was a blur. After my speech, I was surrounded. The same bankers who had ignored my uncle were now pressing their business cards into my hand. The investors Leo had tried to impress were clapping me on the shoulder, congratulating me on my brilliant strategic move. The power in the room had shifted, decisively and irreversibly, to me. My family had vanished. Sometime during the applause, they had slipped out a side exit, unable to endure the humiliation. They were gone, but the shockwaves of their downfall echoed throughout the ballroom. Amelia found me by the terrace, a triumphant grin on her face. "I'd say that went well," she said, handing me a glass of water. "You think," I said, a real smile finally breaking through my composure. "The look on your aunt's face," she laughed. "I think I'm going to frame a picture of it for our office." We stayed for another hour, making the necessary connections, laying the groundwork for the future of the company, but my mind was elsewhere. There was one final conversation that needed to be had. I found them in the private parking garage, huddled by their expensive car, waiting for the valet. They looked defeated. The fight was gone, replaced by a stunned, hollow silence. My uncle snuffed up, trying to muster the last dregs of his patriarchal authority. "Justin," he said, his voice raspy, "we need to talk in private. This public spectacle was unnecessary." "Was it?" I asked, stopping a few feet from them. "After you publicly disowned me? After you told everyone who would listen that I was a failure? I think it was perfectly appropriate." Aunt Eleanor stepped forward, her tactics shifting from aggression to pleading. "Justin, we're family. Whatever has happened, we can work this out. Your uncle, he was only trying to protect you." I almost laughed. "Protect me? You didn't protect me. You abandoned me. You left me with nothing because you couldn't succeeding on my own terms outside of your control." "That's not true," she insisted. "Isn't it?" I countered, my voice dangerously quiet. "You took my inheritance. You let your son steal my intellectual property. You turned your back on me when I had lost my parents and needed you most." "That's not protection, Eleanor. That's a betrayal." For the first time, she had no answer. She looked away, her face crumbling. Finally, I turned to Arthur. He looked like an old man. "What do you want?" "Justin?" he asked, his voice weary. "Do you want to destroy us? Is that it? You want to take everything?" I looked at him, at the man who had caused me so much pain, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not hatred, just a profound sense of distance. "No," I said, "I don't want to destroy you. That was never the point." I paused, letting my words sink in. "I am going to run this company properly. I am going to honor the employees who depend on it, and I am going to build it into something you never could. Your positions on the board are terminated, effective immediately. Leo's employment is also terminated. You will be allowed to stay in the penthouse for 1 month to get your affairs in order. After that, you will have to find somewhere else to live." Arthur looked at me, aghast. "You're kicking us out?" "I'm setting a boundary," I corrected him. "You are no longer a part of my business, and you are no longer a part of my life. I won't take everything from you, Uncle. I'm not you, but the access you once had to my life, the power you held over me, that is gone. Forever." I held his gaze for a long moment, making sure he understood. He finally nodded. A slow, defeated gesture. The fight was over. I turned and walked away without another word. As I headed back towards the lights of the gala, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying for 2 long years. The past was finally where it belonged, behind me. This is the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my own life. The next 6 months were a stark contrast to the turbulent years that had preceded them. Taking the helm of Vance Holdings, which I promptly restructured and rebranded under the Sterling Corp umbrella, was like steering a massive ship out of a storm and into calm waters. The work was intense, but it was a different kind of challenge. It was about building, not just surviving. My first act as chairman was to call an all-hands meeting. The employees of Vance Holdings were terrified. They had heard the rumors, and they expected me to be a ruthless corporate raider who would gut the company and lay everyone off. I walked into the auditorium and saw hundreds of anxious faces staring back at me. I stepped up to the microphone and looked out at them. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Justin Sterling. I know there's a lot of uncertainty in this room right now, so let's clear the air. I'm not here to dismantle this company. I'm here to rebuild it." I spent the next hour laying out my vision, a vision based on innovation, transparency, and respect. I announced an immediate review of all salaries to ensure fair pay, a new promotion structure based on merit, not nepotism, and a company-wide policy that encouraged new ideas from every level. I made it clear that the old way of doing business, the top-down, fear-based culture my uncle had cultivated, was over. I ended the meeting by taking questions for 30 minutes, answering everything honestly, from concerns about their pensions to questions about the new company direction. When I left the stage, the tentative, fearful applause had been replaced by a genuine, hopeful one. For the first time in years, these employees had a leader they could believe in. We worked hard. Amelia, who I had promoted to Chief Operating Officer, was instrumental. She helped streamline operations, cut the waste that Leo and Arthur had allowed to fester, and identified the true talent within the company. People like my cousin Sarah, whom I immediately promoted to head of the entire finance department. She had earned it. I, on the other hand, focused on the future. I poured resources into the tech division, integrating Sterling Corp's innovations with the real estate assets of Vance Holdings, creating smart buildings and a streamlined digital experience for our tenants. It was a fusion of the old world and the new, and it was incredibly successful. Meanwhile, the Vance family faded from the headlines. As promised, they moved out of the penthouse after a month. I heard through the grapevine that they had to sell their summer home and downsize significantly to a modest condo in the suburbs. Arthur was forced into retirement, his reputation in the business community shattered. Eleanor, stripped of her social standing, became a recluse. They were no longer the titans of industry. They were just another wealthy family that had lost its fortune. I took no joy in their fall, but I felt it was a just and natural consequence of their own actions. Life had a way of balancing the books. One afternoon, I was reviewing a major acquisition proposal. It was a deal that would make us the largest commercial landlord in the state, a hugely profitable opportunity. But as I read the fine print, I saw that it involved evicting the tenants of a low-income housing unit to make way for luxury condos. I thought about my first apartment, the one with the groaning pipes. I thought about the people who lived in places like that, who were one missed paycheck away from being on the street. I picked up the phone and called Amelia. "Scrap the deal," I said. "What?" "Justin, this is a huge opportunity," she argued. "I know," I said, "but it's not who we are. Find another way, a better way." We did. We found a way to acquire the property but also relocate the tenants to newer, better housing at the company's expense. It cost us more up front, but it was the right thing to do. That was the legacy I wanted to build. Not one defined by profit at any cost, but by principle. I wasn't just building a company. I was building something my parents would have been proud of. Life settled into a new, productive rhythm. The company was thriving, our employees were happy, and for the first time since my parents died, I felt a sense of peace. The past was a scar, but it no longer ached. Then, one evening, as I was packing up to leave the office, my private line rang. The number was blocked. I hesitated, then answered hello. There was silence on the other end, just the sound of someone breathing. Justin. I froze. I knew that voice. It was Leo, but it sounded different. All the arrogance, all the bluster was gone. It was small, hollowed out. Leo, I said, my voice cautious. What do you want? I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, he started, his words hesitant, and you have every right to hang up on me. I didn't say anything. I just listened. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. The words sounded like they had been dragged out of him for everything. For what I did in Dad's office. For Chloe, for all of it, I was stunned into silence. An apology was the last thing I ever expected from him. Why are you calling me now, Leo? I finally asked. He let out a shaky breath. Because I've lost everything. My job, my money, the respect of my father. He looks at me now, and all he sees is a failure. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Turns out, that's what I was all along. I just had his money to hide it. He continued, his voice cracking. You know, all those years, I was so jealous of you. You were smart. You were creative. Dad always saw you as a threat, another son who might outshine his own. He put so much pressure on me to be better. But I wasn't. I took shortcuts. I got into trouble, huge gambling debts. That's why I was so desperate for your idea why I paid Chloe. I thought I could pass it off as my own and fix the mess I'd made. It all suddenly made sense. His cruelty wasn't born from strength, but from profound weakness and fear. He wasn't a predator. He was a cornered animal, lashing out at anyone he thought was weaker than him. It didn't excuse his actions, but for the first time it explained them. I spent my whole life trying to live up to an image that wasn't me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And you got thrown out with nothing and you built a real empire, something that was yours. You became the man my father always wanted me to be. I didn't know what to say. The anger I had held for him for so long had evaporated, replaced by a strange, hollow feeling that was almost pity. I never wanted to take what was yours, Leo, I finally said. And I was surprised to find that I meant it. I just wanted to build something that was mine. I know that now, he said quietly. Anyway, I had to say it, for what it's worth. He hung up before I could reply. I stood there in my silent office, the phone still pressed to my ear, looking out at the city lights. The final ghost of my past had been laid to rest. The war was truly over. A few weeks after that phone call, I finally moved into the penthouse. It had been professionally cleaned and cleared of all the Vance's belongings. It was a blank canvas. The space was magnificent, of course. The views were breathtaking, a 360-degree panorama of the city I now felt a part of. But as I stood there that first night, surrounded by unpacked boxes, I didn't feel the triumphant thrill I had anticipated. The acquisition of this place had been the symbol of my victory, the ultimate goal. But now that I was here, it felt quiet. It was just a place, a beautiful, empty place. I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the glittering grid of streets below. I thought about my journey, the cold warehouse, the tiny apartment, the windowless office. Each one of those places had felt more like a home than this empty palace did at that moment. Because in those places I was fighting for something I was building. That's when I realized the truth. The goal was never the penthouse. The goal was the person I had to become to get here. The penthouse wasn't the prize. It was just a byproduct. The real prize was the self-respect I had earned, the resilience I had discovered, the integrity I had fought to maintain. My phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Amelia. It was a selfie of her, Sarah, and a few other key team members out for drinks, celebrating a successful quarter. They were all laughing, raising their glasses to the camera. The caption read, "Wish you were here, boss. The real work gets done down here." I smiled, a real, genuine smile. That was my family now, the one I had built. Lying on the marble countertop near the entrance was a single piece of mail that had been forwarded to me. It was a simple, elegant card. Inside, there were only 5 words written in a familiar, neat script. It was from Sarah. "You earned this. Be proud." I held the card in my hand and looked around the vast, empty space one more time. And for the first time, it didn't feel empty. I realized I was finally home. Not because I owned the penthouse, but because after everything, I had finally owned myself. Looking back, the penthouse reveal was only the most visible part of what happened. The real story began when my parents died and my Uncle Arthur took control of the estate they had left behind. I came to him with a business plan I had worked on with my dad, asking only for access to money that was supposed to be mine, and instead he placed it beyond my reach, mocked the idea, offered me an entry-level job under his control, and told me I could leave if I refused. Leo watched the whole thing with a smile, and I walked out with almost nothing. What followed was not glamorous. I worked nights in a refrigerated warehouse, lived in a rundown apartment, and rebuilt my project on public library computers. Then Chloe, one of the last people I trusted, sold part of my early work to Leo for $5,000. That betrayal forced me to start again from scratch, but it also pushed me toward Amelia, the person who finally saw both what I could build and what I could not do alone. Her $20,000 investment became the beginning of Sterling Corporation, and together we turned a fragile idea into a real company. The situation changed again when financial records from Vance Holdings reached us and revealed how badly Arthur and Leo had mismanaged the family business. Instead of attacking them emotionally, we treated the information like a business problem. With Amelia and our lawyer, we quietly bought enough of their debt to become the primary lien holder, which gave us control over the company and its assets. That included Montgomery Estates, the offices where they worked, and eventually the building containing the penthouse Leo treated like his private kingdom. At the charity gala, they still tried to humiliate me as the relative who did not belong in their world. Then Mr. Thompson introduced me as the new owner and chairman of Vance Holdings. I removed Arthur and Leo from their positions, gave the family a month to leave the penthouse, and made it clear that I was not interested in taking everything from them. I was ending their access to my business and to my life. What came afterward mattered more than the public reveal. We rebuilt the company around merit, transparency, fair treatment, and technology, promoted people like Sarah who had actually earned responsibility, and even walked away from profitable deals when the human cost was wrong. Leo later called to apologize and admitted that much of his cruelty had come from fear, jealousy, gambling debt, and the pressure of trying to live up to his father's expectations. I did not erase what he had done, but I no longer needed to carry the anger. And when I finally moved into the penthouse, I understood the last piece. Owning the building had never been the real victory. The warehouse, the library, the tiny office, Amelia's trust, the company we built, and the principles I refused to surrender had changed me long before I ever held the deed. The penthouse was only evidence. The real outcome was that after years of other people deciding what I was worth, I no longer needed anyone else to define it. That is why I think this story is less about revenge than it first appears. The takeover looks like revenge from the outside, because the people who pushed me out eventually lost control of the very company and home they used as symbols of their power. But the important difference is what happens once I actually have that power. I could have stripped the company for profit, fired everyone connected to the old regime, or treated the Vances with the same cruelty they showed me. Instead, I removed the people who had abused their positions and tried to protect the employees who had nothing to do with the family conflict. The other part that matters is trust. Chloe's betrayal could easily have convinced me that depending on anyone was dangerous, yet the company only became possible when I chose to trust Amelia. That does not mean forgetting what happened. It means learning to judge people by what they actually do, instead of letting one betrayal define every relationship that follows. And Leo's apology does not magically repair the past. Understanding why someone hurt you is not the same as excusing it. What changes is that I no longer need his downfall to feel successful. By the end, the boundary remains, the company remains, and the self-respect remains. That is a much stronger ending than simply watching someone else lose. If you were in my position, would you have taken control of the family company once the opportunity appeared, or would you have left it behind and built somewhere else entirely? Tell me what you think in the comments, especially whether you see the takeover as justice, revenge, or simply good business. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.